everyone, my name is Anagha and I'm part of the Data Science Discovery team, and in this video today we're going to be doing a question on finding the largest grade count among all of our subjects. So let's go ahead and get started here. So here it says write the Python code to find the 8 subjects that gave the most A minuses at UIUC. So what we want to do here is first see what our data frame looks like, right? So I'm just going to comment out all this code and basically just print out my data frame to see what is the data that we are dealing with. And here it's basically, we can also look at the description. It's basically just the data frame that contains all of the information for every single course here at UIUC, as well as its like term, the subject, the number, the course name, and like all these columns that show how many students in the course got this respective grade, right? Like how many students in Intro to Asian American Studies got A pluses. Well, that was 6. So it shows all these different columns and it shows how many students got that, specific grade in that course, as well as the instructor and the total number of students. So here we want to just find the 8 subjects that gave the most A minuses at UIUC, right? So, and it says here that each row must contain a subject and an A minus variable, right? So each row must contain a subject variable and an A minus variable. You can create extra columns if needed. Only subject and A minus will be graded. So I think there's two steps here that we need to do to complete this problem. In our original data frame, we have all of these information from every single course from all of these different subjects. But here it's asking us to find the 8 subjects that gave out the most A minuses. So each row must contain a subject variable, right? Our original data frame, each row is a different course, right? And honestly, there's multiple rows for each courses. It's basically each row is like a course which is taught by a different instructor. It doesn't even need to be the same instructor. So we have multiple rows for each subject, right? But we want only one row for each subject, which means that we basically need to group our data frame, right? There's going to be some grouping that needs to be done here to basically condense all of the information that we have for each subject and compile it so that there's only one row for each subject. So our step 1 is really going to be to group our data frame by subject, right? And kind of a big hint here in the question is that each row must contain a subject variable. So that means we need to group our data frame by subject. If it said that each row must contain each row must contain a course, right? Each row must contain a course. Well, that means we need a group by the course title, right? Here, we only want each row to contain a specific subject, so we basically just want to group the data frame by the subject. And how are we going to aggregate all this information? How are we going to condense it? Well, we want to aggregate by, there's 3 choices here, right? There's mean, there's sum, and then there's count. We want to find the 8 subjects that gave the most A minuses at UIUC. So what I'm thinking here is that we basically need to, for each subject, we need to add up how many students got A minuses for each subject. And later on, we'll find the 8 subjects that gave the most A minuses. So the first thing we kind of want to do here is we want to group the data frame and also add up how many students got A minuses for each subject, right? We want to find the total number of A minuses given for each subject. So that's kind of a really good indicator that we should use sum, right? We should aggregate by sum because we basically want to total up how many students, total up all of the A minuses for each subject, right? It doesn't make sense to find the mean of anything, right? What are we going to find the mean of? We can't find the mean number of A minuses. The question's not asking that. It's asking us to find the 8 subjects that gave the most A minuses. So it would make sense to total up how many students got, each specific grade and got each A minus and then go on from there. And why would we not use count? Well, we can see that later, but count basically counts up all the rows that belong to each group, in this case subject. So it's going to count up all the rows that belong to each subject. It's going to keep a running count of, the rows that really are in each subject. And here we don't want to find how many rows belong in each subject. We want to find the total number of A minuses that students got for each subject, right? So we don't want anything to do with counting up, right? We just want to find a total. So that's why we would need to use sum. So here, step 1 would be to group by, and finally step 2, once we have all that information, right, once we have the total number of A minuses for each subject, we want to find the 8 courses that gave the most A minuses. So it seems like we should use n largest here to find the 8 courses with the most A minuses. So let's go ahead and do step 1. So step 1, df, and I can call it something different. So I can call it maybe df subject, since we're grouping by subject, equals df.group by. We're grouping by the subject, we're aggregating by the sum, and we also want to reset our index. So when we print out df subject, this is what we have here, right? We're aggregating by subject, so each row represents each different subject, and that makes sense, right? That's what we want. And when we aggregate by sum, basically what these totals show are the respective sums for each of these columns for each subject. So for example, whenever we see a row that belongs to AAS as its subject, we're just summing up all of the values that we see in all these numerical columns, like year, number, A plus A, and so on. That's why some of our columns are missing, right? Like there was primary instructor, which shows who taught that course, and we can't see here, and it actually makes a lot of sense because we can't sum up primary instructors, right? We can't add strings. So that's why when we use sum, it automatically eliminates any column that we can't sum up. So here, for example, in AAS, there were a total of 31 students who got A+. There were 108 total students who got an A, and 41 total students who got an A-, and 262 students in AAS, in all AAS courses for that specific term. And that makes sense. That's kind of what we're doing here. If we used count, it's basically, like for example, the one thing we notice is that each value is the same for each row, right? It's like, for example, 10 is, it's the same value for each column, and then 5, it's the same values for all of the columns, which makes sense because when we use count, we're basically just counting up the total number of rows that belong in each group, which here it's subject. So for AAS, there's 10 total rows in the data frame, or I guess like different courses in the data frame that belong to AAS. That's why when we use count, it really doesn't matter what the specific values for each of the columns are, because we're just counting up the total number of rows that belong in each subject, and using that count for each value in all of our columns. So it really doesn't matter what values are stored in the columns, because we're gonna overwrite that basically by the total number of rows that basically belong in each group or in each subject, which really doesn't make sense here because we want to find the 8 subjects that gave the most A minuses. So we want to find the total number of A minuses. We want to sum up all the A minuses for each subject. We don't want to find how many courses belong in each subject, which is what count is doing. So when we go ahead and use sum, we can clearly see that here. And then finally, step 2 is to find the 8 subjects that gave the most A minuses. So we want to use, and I think here we can just call it df grade count, since that's what the starter code gave us. So df grade count equals df subject dot n largest. First, we want to go ahead and use the number of rows that we want to output, right, which is 8. We want to find the 8 subjects. And what column are we looking at? Well, it's the 8 subjects that give the most A minuses. So we want to go ahead and look at the A minus column. When we go ahead and print out df grade count, this is basically what is our output. We have these 8 subjects that gave the most A minuses here in UIUC, which makes sense because we first grouped by subject, we aggregated all of our rows by sum. So for each row that belonged to each subject, we just summed up whatever was in each numerical column. So in that way, we were able to find the total number of A minuses for each subject. And then after that, we just found the 8 subjects with the most, there should be 8 subjects with the most A minuses by using n largest. And that's what the question asks us to do. It says each row must contain a subject variable and an A minus variable. There can be extra columns, but it doesn't matter. And we outputted that. And when we go ahead and submit our code, well, we get it correct, which is expected because we did whatever the question asked. So I hope this this explanation was helpful. If you have any questions, let me know, and I'll see you next time. Bye.